This episode of Hanging My Tree is all about Christian Buchan nee Jack. I've really wanted to do a video on a female family member, but generally there's not as much information available about women as there is men, particularly if they completed home duties. I wanted to start with a strong and tough woman because it must have been incredibly hard to raise a big family in these times, to raise her children on the other side of the world in a strange land without the assistance of her parents or family. Christian is the perfect candidate. If you've been following along with my other videos, Christian is the mother of George Rutherford Buchan, who featured in the second episode of Hanging in My Tree. She immigrated from Scotland following her husband, Reverend James Buchan. She travelled to Australia without her husband with 5 children. Her and the Reverend had 9 children. They lived through the Great Depression and World War I. As the Reverend was such an influential man at the time, there were lots of newspaper articles about him and his ministry, but there are also some documents about the contribution that Christine made to the church, the community, and her family. So here are the background facts. Christian was the daughter of John Jack, a tailor of Aberdeenshire, and Margaret Munro. She was born in 1852 in the parish of King Edward's, New Deer, Aberdeen. Ironically, King Edward's is a small village near the north coast of Scotland in Buchan, which ended up being Christian's married name. A number of Ancestry.com family trees suggest that Christian may be one of 14 children. However, I've not done enough research about the family to know how many siblings she actually had. Christian married James Buchan on 5 October 1875 at Fraserburgh, Aberdeen in Scotland, when she was 23 years of age. Just before James married Christian, he had been ordained as a minister and was working at the Broomknoll Street Congregational Church in Airdrie, Scotland, which was a coal mining town. Whilst in Airdrie, Scotland, in 1877, their daughter Margaret Munro, or Maggie, was born. In 1878, their daughter Elizabeth Duthie, or Lizzie Buchan, was born. In 1880, their twin daughters Christian Elizabeth and Annie Jack Buchan were born at 89 Alexandra Street, Airdrie. In 1884, Reverend James Buchan retired from the Airdrie Church due to an unidentified sickness. It was reported that the failings of his health made him consider a move to New South Wales in Australia. At age 37, the Reverend travelled to Australia, leaving his pregnant wife, Christian, 4 children, at home in Scotland to become a minister in Australia. In 1885, when the Reverend was in or on his way to Australia, James Alexander Buchan, Jim, their 5th child, was born in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. In September 1885, the Church Extension Society in New South Wales provided £80 for Christian and their 5 children to travel to Australia. Maggie was around 10 years of age, Elizabeth around 8, Christian and Anne about 5, and James was a baby. On 16 April 1886, Christian and her children arrived in Sydney on the Cassia I Hind, although another source says that they travelled on the SS Suvac accompanied by Elizabeth McFadden, a cousin of the Reverend. Travel to Australia in 1886 was by ship. The ship carried crew, passengers, general cargo and mail. In the 1880s, with the introduction of a government mail subsidy, the steamships became a profitable way to carry immigrants. This journey was physically and emotionally challenging. Passengers and crew members died on the journey. As many as 1 in 5 children and 1 in 60 adults died on the voyage to Australia. The journey seemed to take a minimum of 40 to 60 days through rough seas and weather. The Cassia I Hind was a steamship which was part of the Pyrmont fleet. In 1880, the Argus newspaper reported that it had a good record for good speed. Passages through the Suez Canal, generally steamships had electric lighting, refrigeration and ventilation. Anecdotally, the Cassia Hind had 2 collisions in 1886. On the 7th of June 1886, it was rammed by a British Indian steamer at Suez Canal, and on the 2nd November 1886, it collided with still water in the Strait of Gibraltar. There are a number of newspaper articles about the voyage that Christian and her children went on. An article in the Newcastle Morning Herald on 15 April 1886 notes that the RMS Cassia I Hind was due to arrive in Sydney tomorrow morning from London. The Argus said the trip had been pleasant, the weather except for 1 or 2 occasions was nearly all that could be desired, and socially, Captain Steed and his officers did what lay in their powers to promote the comfort of the passengers. Newspaper articles reported that the present passage has been marked by some fast steaming. Some 12 flamingos were shipped, but only 5 had arrived. The Cassia left London on the 26th of February 1886 and parted with the pilot at the Isle of Wight. Thence she had fine weather passage to Malta, where she arrived on the 5th of March. It left the Suez Canal on the 12th and arrived in Colombo on the 23rd of March. A departure was taken from Colombo to Australia on the 24th of March. Trade winds were strong and maintained their force. As usual, there was a high, tumultuous sea in the region. Cape Leeuwin in Western Australia was passed on the 5th of April and the Cassia anchored at Albany. The voyage resumes to Adelaide on the 6th and arrives there on the 9th of April and started for Melbourne on the same date. On 10 April, there were reports of the arrival of mail and passengers from the Cassia at Albany, indicating that the ship would dock at Gleneagles, Melbourne, Sydney, then Brisbane. It's really interesting that there are newspaper articles about the news brought from the ship from London, including political and business news. On the 14th, she experienced strong winds and very high seas, with continuous rain and frequent squalls during the passage round Sydney. On 16 April, the Sydney Morning Herald reports that the Cassia came round the Heads and berthed at the company's wharf at Circular Quay. We know that Christian and the children met the Reverend and that by 1887 they lived in the manse of the Centenary Congregational Church at Pyrmont. The church was a grand one and was built under the direction of Reverend Buchan. Their son John was born in the manse on the 17th of July 1887. In 1888, William or Bill was born in Pyrmont. I won't go into detail about life in Pyrmont. You can watch the video about George Rutherford Buchan to find out more about Pyrmont in the early 1900s. Suffice it to say that there was much poverty in Pyrmont and the churches provided assistance to the community. By 1890, we start seeing reports of Christians' involvement with the church and the community reported in the newspapers. On the 11th of December 1890, there is a report of a bazaar and sale of works opened in the Pyrmont Congregational School Hall yesterday afternoon, with the Reverend presiding. The report notes that the stalls were prettily arranged with good effects and secured in a tempting way in which the goods were displayed. Mrs. Buchan was reported as a stall holder. On 26 April 1891, my great-grandfather Ernest was born in Pyrmont. On 25 August 1891, Christian celebrated the inaugural celebration of Arbor Day in New South Wales. This occurred at Ultimo Public School. Arbor Day is a holiday for planting and celebrating trees. In 1893, her ninth and last child, George Rutherford, was born in Pyrmont. On 13 May 1895, there was a sale of works in aid of the Pyrmont Congregational Church in the school hall. The sale was opened by Mr. J.R. Fairfax. John Reading Fairfax was part of the prominent media Fairfax family. He was a dedicated member of the Congregational Church, and the Fairfax family served on many community and charity organisations with the Reverend. The sale of works was to help clear a bank overdraft of £150. Mrs. Buchan had a charge of the number 2 fancy stall, and the newspaper reported that the hall was nicely decorated with flags and the stalls were gracefully draped. In 1886, there were reports of Mrs. Buchan being involved in a bazaar in the Congregational School Hall in the general aid of the church. Mrs. Buchan was on the useful and fancy needlework stall, and her daughter Maggie was on the general needlework stall. In 1899, the Reverend, and hopefully Christian, attended Currajong for a week's charge and rest. While he was there, the Reverend visited Windsor and Freeman's Ridge, taking services there. In 1889, there was another bazaar. Mrs. Buchan ran the general provision stall. Her daughter Lizzie ran the Minister Bible class stall. During the evening, senior students under the direction of Lizzie Buchan gave a credible display of school exercises, including dumbbells and Indian clubs. Drills were introduced into the schools in the 1880s to instill discipline. Children had to do stretching and reaching exercises with wooden dumbbells and Indian clubs. Also in 1899, Christian was reported as attending the Sydney Rag School annual treat. The Rag School were an organisation that the Reverend was actively involved in that provided education to poor children. The same newspaper article noted that much of the children were barefooted and very poorly clad. There was an interesting but sad incident that occurred in 1903. Frank Anderson, a Danish sailor, accosted the Reverend near Pyrmont Bridge. He stated that he was in need of food and asked for money. The Reverend declined to give him money, but said he was on his way home and told Mr. Anderson to come with him and he would arrange some food for him. Mr. Anderson accepted the offer and accompanied the Reverend to the manse. The Reverend left Mr. Anderson sitting on a chair while he went to arrange with Christian to prepare some food for him. When he returned, Mr. Anderson had gone and he had taken a silver watch belonging to Christian, valued at £2, 10 shilling. It was later recovered at a pawn shop where Mr. Anderson had pledged it. Mr. Anderson pleaded guilty and he was sentenced to 6 months in jail with hard labour. The magistrate said he showed himself to be a most ungrateful fellow. There's an article written by Christian's grandson, Edmund Perrin, in Church Heritage called A Faithful and Well-Sustained Ministry, the Reverend James Buchan. It not only talks about the Reverend's role in building his parishes and his church, but also his personal life and gives insight into Christian's charitable works and family life. It tells us that Christian was actively involved with the rags schools and her and her family provided clothing and other help. Credible family tradition indicates that Christian Buchan provided food in the kitchen of the manse for itinerates and the homeless. The children were encouraged to achieve the best they could. In 1913, the census showed the family was still residing in the manse at 2 Allen Street, Pyrmont. Chrissy was reported to be a school teacher, Ernest a carpenter, James a junior clerk, John a clerk, Maggie a school teacher, and William a clerk. In 1914, World War I commenced and Christian's son Rudd joined the army on the 21st of September 1914. In fact, 3 of Christian's sons went to war, but only 2 returned. There is a record in the Australian War Memorial of the sons of the Reverend and Christian who had gone to war. Corporal John Buchan in the 3rd Machine Gun Battalion, Captain William Buchan, the 5th, and George Rutherford Buchan. You might recall from Rudd's video that there is a postcard that was sent to his mother when he was first hit by shrapnel and of his tragic death, being missing and killed in action in 1917. In 1920, the Reverend retired and the couple bought a house, Rutherford, in Carlton. Margaret attended Sydney University and became a teacher with the Department of Education. Christine learnt to teach in the rags school and taught at kindergarten for the Department of Education. John was a bank manager. James, William and Ernest were supervisors or managers. Annie and Elizabeth were married. My dad recalls that Christian and James would travel by horse and buggy to Blackheath in the Blue Mountains for a few holidays, and they'd stay at the church holiday home. After 1920, the growing family of Buchan clan continued to meet for special occasions. In 1920, Christian's daughter, Christine, died at age 42. Family notes say that she died as a result of the flu epidemic in 1918 to 1920. It was not unlike COVID. A pneumonic influenza known as the Spanish flu killed more than 290,000 in Sydney alone. Christine had been unmarried, was a school teacher and still lived with her parents, at that stage in their home in Rutherford. Shortly after 1921, the Reverend died. He died without a will and Christiane was granted intestacy with a value of the estate of £689. In 1925, Christian was residing at 11 Bowmer Street, Bexley, Arncliffe or Rockdale, according to the electoral rolls. She lived there until she died. Edmund Perrin's article says, as the clan scattered, it developed an annual gathering just before Christmas. At first in Carlton, where Christian still lived, then at Haberfield at the home of Edmund Perrin, son-in-law of Christian, and finally at Maroubra at the home of Edmund Perrin Jr. The family gatherings included food and non-alcoholic drink, much talk and singing around the piano. Sometimes a member of the family would play the pipes. The last party was in the early 1970s, and by then included great-great-grandchildren. 2 songs were sung lustily to the end. Paddy McGinty's Goat, a World War II song, and a Band of Hope song, Climb, Climb Up the Sunshine Mountain. On 30 August 1936, at age 84, Christian died. She was buried at the Wenora Cemetery. Her gravestone said, "Her children arise up and call her blessed." Christian also died without a will, and intestacy was granted to her daughter Christine. The estate was valued at £152. This video was created for family history purposes. It contains information from ancestry, from the internet, family documents, and also useful information from Christian's grandson's article in Church Heritage. It has direct quotes and also documents that have been copied from the internet.